After an epic battle that lasted for most of your last session, your players ended the game by stumbling into the nearest inn they could find to take a long rest. Having taken whatever treasures they found, in addition to the documentation that advances the plot, you sit down to plan your upcoming session. You have a lot to account for, but you also have the perfect stage to impart all the information you need to give the players without lecturing them. You end up deciding that you'll deal with both the exposition and plot hooks by using an elaborate breakfast scene tonight on Playing God. I'm Nick Logie, and over there wondering why we haven't already planned this session is Xander. How many cats is too many, Nolan?
Hey, man.
So, even though we call this episode Elaborate Breakfast Scenes, this is really more about unpressured downtime style roleplay that can take place in any scene, but mine always seem to happen when the characters are eating breakfast. Xander, what the hell are we even on about with this episode?
Well, one of the things that you should always give to your players, regardless of what kind of game you're running, regardless of what genre it is unpressured downtime. Not downtime as in the space between games where they have different actions that they can do, but just soft role play where they can explore character ideals, they can talk with the other players in a way that they don't have to feel like combat is right around the corner or that they have some pressing matter that really needs to be addressed in the moment, though sometimes they can use these times to do exactly that and prepare for battles slash, look through their notes and all of their abilities and try to figure out what to do next. But this is just time where they can sit back, relax. They don't have to worry about being adventurers because they're just people at this point in time. And it really adds a lot of flavor and a lot of flair to the character's ability to role play back and forth.
And this is a good spot for you as a GM to also use this as a non pressured roleplay as well for your own characters because you're not sitting there waiting to roll initiative or trying to set up some kind of surprise in order to like take on the players. That this is just you acting as your NPCs. This is your players sitting down and just having a conversation like Xander said. This isn't exactly like a full downtime thing, but this kind of feels downtimey in a lot of ways. You could actually use it during downtimes, but you're typically never going to do what we call the elaborate breakfast scene in anywhere that isn't someplace where the characters might feel safe. There's some exceptions to this. You could probably do this even in the middle of a dungeon if you really wanted to. But the whole point of it is they don't have to worry about having their armor on. They don't have to worry about rolling insight against any NPC that you say something to them about because they think they're lying. Just
Well, they trust
chill
these
out.
people.
Yeah.
Yeah, let their hair down, so to speak.
So we always start this as an elaborate breakfast scene because usually what happens in our specific games is that our players have finished up with something, maybe even a big plot point, or they've just discovered something new that they need to analyze. And instead of going through and from like an out of play perspective, speaking to the players as like informative fact distributor, you're instead presenting all this information as an in play thing that the characters and players can digest simultaneously.
Yeah, it's some of those moments where players really get the opportunity to sit and discuss back and forth about their plans. They get the opportunity to speak about different things that they're working on. I know that in our game, everybody steals my character's toast for some reason. It's just kind of become a thing.
That's a meme
Uh,
now.
it's totally a meme now. For my game specifically, I've actually been doing the breakfast scenes, but at the beginning of game and giving them the opportunity because my game has been tending to this game session is this day, then the next game session will be the next day, and everybody gathers downstairs at the inn in the Blue Star Cafe to have breakfast and discuss what they're going to do with their plans for the day.
That's
And
perfect. We'll start
yeah,
there. We'll start as what'd you call the inn?
the Blue Star Cafe. Well, it's inside of the Dragon Inn.
Well, you're at the Blue Star Cafe. Well, let's use that as our scene. Because that's a concrete thing that you have in your game. In
Yes,
my Legends of Latir game, back when they needed to do something like this in way, way early times, that was the Drowning Tuna, or
Drowning Tuna.
whatever the hell the name happened to be at the time. Uh, and so you typically would start this at the start of a session because players have just come back just sat down. Like people are still like getting
Yep.
into character. They're still like maybe they don't remember clearly what happened like at the end of last session. It's been a week or two. Who knows how long it's been? So you start giving them this information. You maybe in this tavern we have like the bartender. Like it's a friend of theirs from who knows how many games, but it's an NPC that you play. So as the GM, you don't have to give them like plot critical information pouring out of this NPC's mouth as if they were you. You could let the players actually bounce ideas off that NPC while they're speaking to him in play. So if they're seated at the bar and they got some meats and some drinks and whatever they're doing, then they could straight up ask the NPC questions like they would ask you. And then this gives you an easy out for not giving them certain information because the NPC wouldn't know it. And maybe they
Yeah.
haven't found it in play yet, so don't want to tell them that yet either.
Yeah. It's also a way for them to engage with social interactions that make the world feel a little bit more real. Let's say, for example, the player characters have gone on a bit of a mission to do a thing, and they've come back, and one of the player characters had gone off on their own to do things and found themselves in a bit of trouble. And the NPC that they end up going to happens to be the one that's running that bar or that area. And so now that particular NPC is rather wary of that player character, but not so wary of the other ones, and is freely giving them any information that she might have. But it gives the GM an opportunity to kind of delve into the mindset of that particular NPC, role play with his players, because one of the things that you really kind of want to do as a DM, even though there are two different camps, some do, some don't. It gives a sense of realism to that particular character, and it makes them more fleshed out for the entirety of the
Or if you don't want to introduce
campaign.
if you don't want to like reiterate or introduce conflict like that, because I would probably we're assuming the rogue went to steal something is why we're why they went off on their own and got into trouble.
Well, the warlock actually ended up eating a cupcake that was filled with a very, very powerful aphrodisiac, and the warlock happens to be very, very attracted to dragons and dragonborn.
So
So
maybe a
yeah,
half dragon's going to be coming into play because at some point.
yeah. Well, I went to the bartender because that's who she was. She's a dragonborn, and
Oh, she's a dragonborn.
it did not go well for him or the dragonborn. So she's kind of wary of him, but is like, all right, I'm cool with you guys, but you're a weirdo. You tried to hump my leg.
Well, all right. So even if you don't have that complication going down, this is a time where you could add tidbits of information about the world and the lore itself,
Yeah.
without either ham-fisting it or without directly tying it to the plot, because that is really where you're going to get a lot of like fleshed out lore is when you don't tie it to the plot. This is
Yep.
something like maybe you're in some kind of setting where the bartender's like, hey, did you catch this game, like this sports thing that happened? But it's not any sport that we have in real life. It's just something you made up for the sole purpose of basically this one line, and it just adds a little something more to your setting. Maybe the players
Hmm.
will never look at it again, but since you mentioned it and they're the players, they're going to immediately try to get it all up in that business.
Be like,
With
let's go play this game. I actually have an NPC that has that. She's a regional champion for it, but she broke her hand and she's kind of upset about it. And now she just does. Now she just does her blacksmithing, and her career as an athlete is over. And they actually haven't even met this NPC yet, which is upsetting to me a little bit. But
well, if they listen to the podcast, then they might have already kind of just did that.
yeah, well, I mean, they don't know which NPC this is, so they can still look around and try
Yeah,
to figure
that's
out what the hell
true.
it
That's
is.
true. Um, but this is so. Not only do you want to put in just like these little sprinkling tidbits of things, and other role play specific stuff, then don't forget you are still here to use this scene to also kind of recap the last game. Maybe
Yeah.
this is a good way for if they're maybe a friendly NPC that they haven't seen in a while comes in, and they ask the players what they've done. So it's not you as a GM telling them what they did, it's them recapping it to you. And then you get to see if something that you thought of didn't line up with what they thought they did, or if this might be a good place to clarify certain confusing aspects that they might have stumbled upon in the last session. Like if they found some kind of like tome and you gave them a handout and the players read it, but they interpreted it in a different way, but
Which happens all the time.
which does happen all the time, and usually I just let that slide. But maybe they interpret it in such a way that's like so wrong that it's going to throw them so far off course, or like completely derail like everything that you have. That you need to be like, okay, no, this is what is actually happening, because
Yeah.
you could either just let them take the complete misunderstanding, and then you got to rewrite your entire frickin' campaign, or you could with an NPC nudge them back onto the right path, which
Yeah.
doesn't like wrest control of their characters and shove them on a railroad, but it kind of like says, okay, this is where you were intending to point as well, like the players, because they're trying to solve this thing, but if
Yeah.
they solve it in the wrong way, then they're wasting their own time.
Yeah, you could even go so far as to instead of stating that as a GM, you could have the NPC kind of furrow their brow and reach forward and say, "Let me see that for a second. Huh, this is interesting. It seems odd that you interpret it as this instead of like this. That's how I would interpret it. But to each their own." And it gives them just the nugget of information of maybe we're not thinking about this quite right, and it kind of gets the gears turned, and they're like, maybe he's right. That actually makes a lot more sense. Let's take this path instead. And it feels like an organic means by which they made the choice to change their course of action. And it wasn't like all right, you're doing this wrong. This is how it was supposed to be. This is what you were supposed to figure out. And then it feels like that aha moment was robbed from them.
And they could still just keep the interpretation like they think it is originally, and
They
they could just
totally
go from
can.
there anyway.
Yeah,
You could
just
also use this
adapt.
you could also use this to like physically modify your handouts and other aspects of the game. So like let's say that the players found something on their map that they need to update. And normally they wouldn't be the like they don't know it's there yet, but they found out enough clues that they might know roughly where it is. This might be a good time for the NPC like they're talking to. Maybe it's someone from like a map making guild, and they're like, no, hold on, why don't you have this on here? And they point to the map where like there's an empty section, and they're like, well, what do you mean? There's nothing there. And it's like, well, there should be. There should be this, and then like that could introduce in and of itself a mystery. It's just like because if
Hmm.
if other maps say that there's something that should be here and there isn't, then that could be a plot hook in and of itself that you've given them without saying like you roll history and notice that on the map there is a specific section that doesn't match up with what you remember it should look like. It feels a little more organic.
Yeah, and it to introduce NPCs that may or may not be familiar with the party, or the party may not be familiar with them. This is another opportunity to kind of do that. Say you need an NPC that's going to give them information that is not usually around, but it's like the dark cloaked figure in the corner who's never been to this particular tavern before. This is a perfect place to inject them, because they're going to be like, all right, let's talk about our plans, but let's not raise our voices because there's a weirdo in the corner. And it's like, I see you over there, adventurers. I'm going to come over now. Don't attack me. I just have some information for you. I've been looking for you for a fortnight now, and I think you're the ones. Yes, you're the ones. And then they come over, give information, are totally creeped out by the random cloaked figure, and it's just one of those random encounters that doesn't necessarily have to lead to combat. And they can speculate whether or not this dude's telling the truth or not, but you don't have to worry about them. Like, all right, can we like drawing swords outside of a castle gate to talk to the guy who's the caretaker? It's like, all right, is this caretaker lying to us about what's inside? This guy's just freely handing them information, and for motives that are his own, and he could be a recurring NPC and all that jazz. But this space is open for you to provide exposition that can come from any source in any direction. And if, say, your players are sitting there spinning their wheels trying to figure out what's going on, that's the good place to kind of flick an NPC in there that's like, hey, I heard about this thing. Yeah. Oh, no. It's just two dudes talking back and forth about something that happened on their way to work this morning, or on their way home last night. And they're just like, hey, wait a minute, that's pertinent to what we're doing. So the conversation back and forth aspect is also a good opportunity to do stuff like that.
What I would say that for there's two kinds of NPC actions that you really take when you're doing one of these scenes. The first is you introduce NPCs that are non-vital to whatever's going on. That, like Xander's example with the two dudes who are just going to work, the players might still talk to them, in which case you can kind of flesh them out as needed. Or the players will just be like, oh, hey, that's interesting, and then they'll just take that information that they've overheard and then shuffle it on to somewhere else. The other thing that I would say is this is it kind of goes back to a bit more of the role play aspect of it. This is where you can like really flesh out impactful parts of a specific NPC that is critical to the plot, but normally wouldn't have one of these scenes. The example that I'm thinking of right now is from Legends of Latir. It's when you guys went to meet Count Meltor, and it's a big thing because he's your first real contact on Outer Sanctuary, and he had like this big castle and like these undead soldiers and stuff like that, and it's a lot to take in, and he's definitely a vampire, as you found out. So
Yeah,
there was a lot of action going on until we got to the elaborate breakfast scene the next morning, where first of all he didn't show up for like half of it because first he's busy, and that way he could shows that NPCs are doing something when they're not on screen. And then the other part is when he did show up, and this was a big hint for uncovering that he was a vampire because they didn't know this immediately at the time. Though I'm pretty sure everybody immediately had their doubts just because of everything else that I've set up.
Well, see, everybody but Kenton had those doubts. Just in the middle of the night, he hears freaking skeletons walking down the hallway, and he's like, what the fuck is going on? Someone's trying to attack Count Meltor. And he jumps into tucks and rolls into the office, grabs the thing, starts beating it to a bloody pulp right in front of him. And Count Meltor's like, what are you doing? That's one of my guys.
Yeah, he looks up from the book he's reading because it's like 4 a.m, and
Don't worry,
he's just
I'll
like,
save you.
he's like, the fuck? Are you serious?
Don't worry, Count Meltor. I'll save you from this fiend.
I'll save
That's
you
one
from
of
your
mine.
own guys. So
He's
then,
"That's one of mine."
so he joked about that on that following like breakfast scene, and then it also showed like when he was like given his portion of the quote unquote food, he didn't actually eat anything. He just drank what I described as a viscous red wine. That was pretty much the point when everybody figured it out. But
Yes. He's a vampire. That's right. That's right.
but it let this
That's
character
right.
who is normally like this tall, imposing thing, just sit in a chair, joke with the other characters, drink his blood, and then go on about the day. Because that led into the mission eventually, where he was like, "Okay, the setup's done. Guys just need to get in your ship and go here."
Go do
And
the thing.
and it wasn't something that I told you guys to do. It was something that you guys already decided you were going to do. But I just wanted to reiterate so that way I, as the GM, could make sure that that the
We were
players
going the right direction.
well, not even that. That the players that I understood what the players wanted to do, and made sure that there wasn't any miscommunication that way. Because yes, it's important for the players to understand what you're trying to do, but it's also important for you to understand what they're trying to do. That's
Oh,
also
absolutely.
why every time you guys launch a plan, I always go, okay, you're right. You're doing this, which is going to result in this, and then this, right? And then
Yes.
you guys all confirm that. I'm like, okay. Usually, none of those things are what happens when you actually go down, like the plan starts. But this way, I know what I'm supposed to plan for, and so that way, I don't throw some curveball at the players like an NPC that they were going to try talking to, I accidentally think that they're going to like stab them instead. So I set up the stabbing scene, and then it turns out that you didn't want to do that at all, and it's like, oh shit, I got to change this like
crap.
on the fly.
Yep. or we intend to go and talk to somebody, and you're like, I'm gonna make it a stabby scene anyway. Good luck, fuckers.
Yeah, I already have the map in Roll20 laid out, and I'm like, the initiative's been pre-rolled, so I don't have to roll for 5 characters. Then I'm like, okay, guys, roll initiative, and you're like, we're talking to him. It's like, I
I
know you're
know.
talking to him. You're talking to him in initiative
He doesn't
now.
want to talk to you. Oh no! We're gonna have to fight the guy. We just wanted to talk,
I mean,
man.
I can't. I know there. I don't need to like inundate this episode with examples, but there was that one time where you guys did talk in initiative and eventually stopped initiative by talking and rolling persuasion and shit during your turn, which was
Yeah.
awesome. So it could still go the way you want to, but it's not a guarantee at that point.
hmm That's one of the kind of more subtle things that GMs can do, where you have them set to go to a certain location, and you have them set to do different things. And the great thing about these kinds of scenarios is they can be picked up and just placed wherever you need them. So if the players decide they want to go to here, but you really need them to have this information before they get there, you can say, okay, how are you going to do this? What are you going to do? And there's sort of like micro inject this small bit of information, this NPC who happens to be in the area just completely by chance, and they can have a short kind of role play session. And these things can be completely spur of the moment. They don't necessarily have to be the recap for the episode.
Yeah, you don't have to do these things like plan this out. I typically don't. We just kind of end up doing it.
Yeah. So they don't necessarily have to be anywhere unless you feel like it's necessary for them to have some time to put a little bit of exposition, a little bit of character growth, and things like that. Because one of the things about D&D that's people love is they want to go fight shit and they want to get the loot. And regardless of how role play heavy your game is or role play heavy your characters want it to be, there's still the aspect of combat that they really really want to get into, and they really want to they want to fight, they want to use the mechanics. But because that is one of those things, your game can very quickly become bogged down with just fight after fight after fight. It's like, all right, we fought this dude, we're going to go over here and fight this dude. And all right, so in the space between there, you encounter this. And it's just someone comes up to you and says, welcome to our village. Welcome, passersby. What can we do for you? And they're just like, well, we're not going to fight these people because these aren't the people that we're looking for. But it is kind of late at night. Is there an inn in this town by chance? And they just kind of segue themselves into, a dinner scene where they can sit down and be like, all right, here's the plan that we're going over. It helps the GM because you can get a clear understanding of what their plans are moving forward and prepare to mess them up. Because
I
I
mean,
like doing that sometimes.
that's a great thought because like sometimes the players will be the ones who initiate this where you're sitting there like
Yeah.
okay they are gonna go to this next fight after this one, and then the players are like, well, you know what, we're gonna sit down and we're gonna do this. Like in the middle of that dungeon really early
Yeah.
on in Legends of Latir, you guys had an entire dinner scene at like the top of a staircase in this hostile dungeon, and you're like, we're gonna set up a campfire in here, and we're gonna eat like this cake, and we're gonna really talk some shit over. And I was like, okay, sure, whatever, go do whatever you want. And I didn't even have an NPC like that was non-hostile anywhere within like several square miles of them.
Yeah.
And they just sat there and
So,
role played for a while, which gave me some time to see what was up ahead to make sure that it was planned properly. And
mhm.
it gave me some good character details that I brought back later on in the game that
Yep.
were introduced into their like personal plots and all that shit.
Yeah, your players can totally initiate these scenes by themselves. They typically happen on their own if the players feel like they need to rest. Like they're just done with a fight, they're kind of haggard, they're a little worn down, and you planned for this dungeon to be just a long haul where they're going to get to the end boss, and it's going to be one of those things where they don't have a lot of spells left, they don't have a lot of their powers and their abilities left, they're kind of exhausted, they're falling down, and then in the middle of the dungeon they're just like, yeah, let's just rest here. I feel like dog crap, so let's just take a minute. Okay, so
Like a
This is
short
going well.
rest,
How do you
I could
guys think?
understand that.
Yeah. But sometimes they'll take a long rest, even if it's not logical to do so in hostile territory.
Yeah, that's a bit of a gray area, especially for me, because after having experienced that in a few different dungeons, uh,
Yeah.
there's I would say like if you planned on it for it to be a like slog or like a they are pretty harrowed by the time they reach the end of it, then they shouldn't get to have a long rest. The short rest, sure, whatever. It's like a couple
Yeah.
hours. You can stay on watch and all that. But like, not a long rest. Something will disturb their slumber,
Disturb their slumber.
or at the very least, the pressure of being in this hostile territory makes this like they sleep for 8 hours and it's not restful. It's filled with nightmares, and you wake up every 30 minutes because you hear something, and you sleep for 8 hours, but you don't get a long rest.
Yep. And it's one of those things where you have to kind of judge as a DM whether or not this is something that they should be able to do in this location. Now, if they go through the process of like, there's a room with only one door, and they set up, say, a tiny hut or something like that, they're specifically going through the process of taking a long rest in hostile territory, and they're doing everything they can to try and protect themselves. Then at those moments you can have something kind of pound on the door if necessary. But if they,
I might let
yeah,
people get away with that, but
yeah, if
oh,
they're
oh,
using resources to try and take that rest because they feel like they need it, then I would just
that's
normally
yeah,
let them
that's
do
one
it.
thing. Ultimately, it's mostly about if you think your players are trying to game the system. Like if anybody watches me and Eric play Baldur's Gate, then you know that we will do one fight and then sleep for 8 hours because it's a video game and nobody cares. We also kill everybody we come across, which is hilarious too. But uh, like in an actual D&D game, you don't want to clear out a room, go to another room, sleep for 8 hours, or sleep in the same room with all those dead bodies. Uh,
Yeah, no.
like it needs to be more fluid and a little more realistic. We all know my stance about realism, and it's usually give it double middle fingers while you jump up because gravity falls upwards or whatever. But like, just be reasonable with that one.
Yeah, you don't want to ruin the suspension of disbelief, because that's one of the things that players and the GM alike do when they sit down to this game, because it's unlike any other game that you will play. It's an open format, open world where you can go and do whatever you want. It may not be what you think you should be doing, but sometimes the best content and the best uh, kind of scenes that you'll get are things that are just spurred by the players not wanting to engage with the plot hooks that you keep hawking at them, trying to drag them in. Sometimes they'll just be like, you know what, that sounds like it could be important, but I think there's someone more capable of handling this particular situation, because that's a monster, and that's a big monster, and we don't really want to mess with the big monster until we're a little tougher. So we're gonna go over here and do this thing and try to figure out how to get a little bit more beefy before we go handle the monster. Just let them go and do it. But when that suspension of disbelief is levied against the players in a forceful manner, they will tend to resist it, because their brains kind of kick in. It's like, well, this is just a game. Why do we have to worry about whether or not physics allows me to swim up this waterfall? It's the fastest way up there. I've got a swim speed. Can't I swim up the waterfall? It's cool. Fuck it,
At
let
that
them do
point,
it.
I would actually call for an athletics check because, yeah, if you have a swim speed, then you get to make the athletics check. If you don't have a swim speed, then you auto
No.
fail.
Yeah, but like if you've got someone that's got a swim speed and wants to go up there to get a rope so that they don't have to have, you know, 5 whole minutes of just them trying not to fall
Yeah,
off the side of this cliff face.
yeah, you don't need that.
Yeah, let them circumvent some of the issues that you have,
Or
but you still gotta kind of give it
it could
realism.
be tense without involving everybody. So let's say this player with
Yeah,
the swimsuit. We're on a super fucking weird tangent, but I don't care. Like this player who has a swimsuit wants to fly, to swim up the waterfall. They roll the athletics. Just give them like one check or something like that. Not two at most if you're really feeling spicy. But they roll it, they succeed, they get up the waterfall, and then that's when they could be like, okay, what's up here? And then you tell them like what the terrain is, and then they cinch a rope onto the nearby tree, huck the rest of their 50-foot hemp down the waterfall, and then the other players just get to climb up. Because that
Yeah.
was the whole setup. If they failed that check, then they fall out of the waterfall and maybe take like some amount of damage, or if you're playing like Pathfinder or something with non-lethal, give them that. But
Yeah.
like they take
Oh,
a
I
little
forgot
bit of something.
there was a non-lethal thing in Pathfinder. I completely forgot about that.
Yeah, but it was kind of obnoxious. I mean, I wouldn't say obnoxious. It kind of bogged things down, I'd say, because then you had to keep track of like how many hit points from zero you were higher than, and then also how many hit points from maximum you were lower than, and that's pretty much why fifth ed got rid of it. But in fifth ed, maybe like if they're low on HP and they tried this and they fall off, instead of like having them go critical and bleed out, then they hit the water and they just hit zero, and it's as if a monster hit them, non-lethal. They get knocked out. It could still be perilous because now they're in water, but
Drowning.
and like
So
drowning,
just kind of
but
floating
it's
there.
not
And,
as
oh, shit.
it's not as immediately dire as anything else would be. But
Yeah.
that was a long ass tangent
That was a
about a
long
waterfall
tangent.
and swimming. But
Continuing to move on, beyond these kind of downtime ish scenes, keep in mind that as a GM, you're not necessarily limited to the game time with them either. I've had a couple of opportunities running my game most recently where some of the players will be like, "Hey, man, so I want to go and talk to this NPC during my downtime actions because I have two downtime actions, each of which last 2 hours per game session. That it's like a couple of hours before bed that they get to just kind of I'm
you
gonna
have an
plan
action
my thing
economy for downtimes.
precisely. And they're like, hey, I want to go talk to this NPC about this thing. And I'm like, okay, that will probably require some actual dialogue. Do you want to meet up, say, this Friday afternoon, and we'll sit down, we'll do, 20-30 minute scene of just you talking with them. There's no roles, there's no combat. It's just an NPC and a PC, or possibly even two PCs, sitting down talking to this person because they have information that's pertinent to the game, but it's not bogging down the actual game time. And sometimes these things don't have to necessarily be anything other than the players want to have downtime scenes between themselves. Like I know that early on in Legends of Latier, I would have downtime actions where I would just sit and I think it was referred to as a snuggle scene, where my character is sitting there with their character, and we're talking back and forth, just about the things that we're doing, about who we are as characters. It helps to flesh things out, so they're not necessarily limited to during game time either. So keep that in mind.
That's what you called it? Nobody ever told me what any of that was going on in the background. Oh yeah, that's the other thing. Let me tell you about what my players were doing when I wasn't around. So, so they were having their own side scenes
Yeah.
outside of game entirely, and I didn't even know about it until like a few weeks in. Well, we're Xander was here. I was like, yeah, I was talking to Mara's character how to play, and we were like, we had like this scene where we were like talking through our stuff, and I was like, well, that's really cool because like I didn't actually need to be there for it, but
Yeah.
like it just kind of came out of nowhere, and I was like, huh, I guess you could do something like that, couldn't you?
Yeah, you can totally do that. Like I had I don't know, 5-6 solid actual hours worth of conversation with another player's character as my character that had no bearing on the story, had no we weren't doing a lot of planning or anything like that for what the conflict was. We were just talking back and forth as people, and that kind of role play can really add a richness to your characters and to your players. So if you want to present that as an option, it's like, hey, if you guys want to set up a chat room where you guys just talk as your characters, like say you use Facebook and you just have a chat room, downtime chats, and you guys are just talking back and forth as if you're sitting around a campfire. You don't have to do those little moments all the time during game because they're handling themselves. And when you say, hey, you guys could totally talk with each other, out of game, off time, sometimes players are like, well, we could do that. All right, I'll give it a
I
shot,
mean,
and then they'll
sometimes
get in
players are gonna
conversation.
like players are a lot of times gonna do that just on an out of play level anyway.
Yeah, yeah,
So
they're totally going to
like,
do that.
but if you are gonna do this, like whatever they talk about, even if it is pertinent to like what the plot is going on, none of that can actually matter when they come back to the table. Like in terms of like maybe that you
Mechanically.
maybe yeah mechanically maybe they came up with a theory that may or may not be correct, whatever, and then they like and they've talked about this a lot on an, like their own personal levels, and then they come back and then it as a GM, if you're surprised by this, it's almost like they have like information that they didn't have before. Like
Yeah,
this can't be like you can't go up to the GM and say, "Hey, we went to talk to this guy," and they're like, "No, you fucking didn't, because I wasn't there to be that guy,"
yeah,
and it it has to pretty much only be role play.
yeah. And it has to be exclusive to the player characters themselves, unless they talk to you and say, "Hey, I want to do talking with this person," and you're like, "Yeah, sure."
Yeah,
Because
they could set the scene. They could just if they really want to. I've never done one of these things before, so I'm kind of theorizing myself here. They could maybe even describe that there are like other NPCs around, but none of those NPCs like can interact with them or will ever hear them or know that they did that at all. Like
they're
unless you as the
gremlins.
GM are there doing this, then
Yeah,
that's different. But if you are there as the GM doing that, all the players need to be there. This shouldn't be a side scene.
yeah. The exception to the rule, the exception to that that I would generally allow is, let's say they're sitting in the Blue Star Cafe, and they get their meals and stuff for free because they rent their rooms, and it's kind of all one package deal.
Sure, sure.
So when they go down to the Blue Star, they get their food for free, so they don't have to pay for it. So if they say, "Hey, we went down to the Blue Star, we had a meal together a couple of days ago, we ordered our food, and we sat down and we talked things out, and here's the results of us talking those things out." Uh, I'm not going to say, "Okay, well, I can't approve this because you ordered food from the barmaid and you clearly know the barmaid." The barmaid would just typically act like a barmaid and give you your food, give you your drinks, things like that, and not really engage with the situation.
And
So you guys,
depending on like what level the characters are or how rich they are, that if even if you bought food or something without having this package deal, I might just say screw it. I don't care about 4 copper on your goddamn character sheet.
yeah,
Like
no, that's not a big deal.
whatever, you get the dumb
You
meal.
get some food.
I'm not getting hung up on this one point just for the rest of this.
Yeah. So keep in mind that sometimes your players are going to take it a little bit out of your hands. And as long as it's just soft role play, that's fine. Because that does two things for you as a GM. One, especially if you have access to the conversations, you can watch their evolution as characters, and you can kind of, gauge who they are as a player and who they are as a character. And that does something for you, but it also creates a situation in where the players are exchanging this information to the other players, and they're creating character growth independent of the table, independent of the game time and the game session. And what that will do is you can then focus your game time a little bit more economically and not have to worry so much about them doing an exorbitant amount of character growth because they're doing it on their own anyway.
I think as a side note, or at least a personal opinion for this these side scenes, is I would personally not really do anything like this. It's up to you, obviously, and I know Xander loves doing this kind of thing, but
Oh, it's awesome. I love it.
I stay away from this for a couple of reasons. One, if I'm the GM and like I want to see your characters develop, I'm going to see it at the table because I don't have a ton of time to watch something like this go down. The second
Yeah.
is if you are going to do this, then make sure that you are willing to include anyone else at the table. So this exchange that's happened in my game has pretty much exclusively been between Kenton and Mara. But
And
if
yeah.
it would if I would say if you're going to do this, if they don't get to like force their way in, but if Karks, for example, wanted to do one of these side scenes, you should also be willing to do that with them.
Oh, absolutely. I've done a couple of side scenes with Karks.
I didn't even
Uh,
know that. God damn it!
Yeah. I've also done. We did a side scene where damn, I can't remember. The drow, the male drow.
Holy shit, dude!
Uh,
There's a lot of characters that are drow. Are you talking about a
uh,
player character? Or are you talking about
player character.
Rizalk?
Yeah, yeah. No, it wasn't. Wait, was it
Rizalk
Rizal?
yes. Red Silver was the woman, and
Okay,
Rizalk
yeah.
was man.
All right, so I actually had a side scene with Rizalk at one point in time, where Rizalk is basically calling me a friggin' moron the entire time, and I'm just like, well, this is how I've done things, and they're just like, yeah, no, totally, dude. This is how shit goes down where I'm from. This is how shit should go down here. You guys are kind of fucking shit up for yourselves, and I'm like, yeah, maybe you might be right. And also provided me with a little bit of insight into this next fight that we're going into, that we're traveling towards right now, could potentially be the last one that I have. So make it count.
I mean, in
Things
those
like that.
early days, any fight you had might have been the last one you had.
But fuck, many of those fights were the last one I should have had
You
as
did.
kitten.
You
'Cause
went
I got
down a
my ass
lot.
kicked a lot.
Fucking monks, man. They don't
I,
get good until a lot later.
to be fair, my monk didn't get good until I got my, what was it, my second ability score improvement, and I was like, fuck not being
Oh
able to
yeah,
hit
that's
shit.
true
I'm
because
throwing it into the dex.
you did super gimp yourself by putting your like charisma as one of your main stats instead of like dex
Yeah,
or whatever the other one should be. I think wisdom.
yeah. As a matter of fact, my highest stat is still charisma,
That's
like
fine.
straight up.
Whatever.
Actually, I think
Yeah.
my dex is now an 18 too.
It's reasonable enough that you can actually win in combat instead of just survive.
Hmm. Yeah, I can actually do something with some ability and not get my ass handed to me on a constant basis. Uh, my character was totally a joke when it started out, and
No, I mean
if you
not
play her,
really. You weren't a joke in combat. There were jokey moments because you basically hit 0 HP almost in every single fight, even against something that
just
you should
about.
not have hit 0 HP when fighting.
Yeah, it's about my AC was low, my attack bonuses were low. In a fucking conversation though, watch the hell out, dude.
Oh, that was
I
great. Yeah,
can
that was some
I can
great
convince
moments.
anybody to do anything.
I can't.
I convinced.
What was the monster? Was it I think like maybe a like a gnome or a kobold or something that you were 1v1ing and it managed to like nuke you?
Oh, it was a kobold. A kobold kicked his ass, just
Yeah,
straight up down.
you were like level 3, and it was like a CR 1/8 monster, and I was just like, I'm gonna
Yep.
win.
It's like it's just
Like,
kick
holy
his
shit.
ass.
So something else you could do with these elaborate scenes, and something that you don't, you might not need in like a Dungeons and Dragons type setting, but this is to, since you are bringing more humanity and more like soft roleplay to this scene, then use it to like alleviate some tension. Use
Yes.
it to bring down the darkness, lighten that up a little bit. Like tone down the grittiness in certain games. Like maybe if you're playing Dark Heresy, which is nothing but grit,
Or
then
Shadowrun maybe.
yeah, or something like Shadowrun, then you would use these scenes for comedy. Even
Hmm.
like almost every horror movie has some kind of comedy in it because there needs to be something to cut the tension at some point. Because if you're just tense the whole time, then that you're just always on edge, and that actually loses some of the luster for like the horror or darker elements later on. So
Yeah.
if you use one of these scenes to like if you're in like an oppressive like city state that like the guards are all corrupt or not even corrupt, that they're like the government is actively evil and they fly the flag of chaos above them, then you need some time to be like, oh man, there's like this weird little talking puppy thing that is over in the
Yep.
corner here, and we're gonna talk to that for like 2 hours while we take like a short rest. And as a GM, you're not gonna throw any monsters at him. That puppy dog is actually like just adorable, and it's not
Yep.
some kind of evil monster, then that brings down the tension. So when you start ramping up the tension again, or like the horror, whatever theme you're going for, then that's much more impactful because then like maybe like at the very end of this whole thing and like the dog scampers off and like goes into like this tiny hole that only it can access, then that the players know something's up now, and you're kind
Yep.
of moving back into the oh shit, we need to pay attention to like every little thing that's going on, and then it's like, damn, we've had our rest, but it's like we got to get back to this grind.
Yeah.
We got to go topple this government.
Yeah. Now you don't have to take that so far as to be like Tucker and Dale versus Evil, that level of ridiculous, versus horror, or
Tucker
gritty.
and Dale versus horror.
Yeah, that's. Now I'm imagining that shit. Oh god. And you don't have to take it so crazy like a scary movie, or anything like that. But you can definitely use these moments to kind of give them a break from that tension. And it does a couple of things for your game. One, they will remember these moments forever. Like these will be the times where there's like, hey, do you remember when we were sitting in that in the basement of that place, and your character was like, you know what, I'm gonna try this thing, and tries the thing but completely fucking failed, and it was so amazing. Yeah, that was right before two of our player characters died. Yeah, it was that was pretty rough. But hey, that scene before it, we'll remember that shit forever. So it's a way to kind of uh, break away from the theme that you have going on for the plot and inject some other aspects of role play, because nobody is constantly going to be in pants shitting terror or worried about looking over their shoulder at all the points at every point in time, because there's going to be a place where they can, oh fuck this, it is terrifying out there, man. But in here, it's safe. It's safe for a few minutes where we can just kind of breathe and relax. And it helps to bring a little bit more realism. And it helps you as a GM to recharge, because one of the things that a lot of players who are career players and don't GM very often, those scenes also take a toll on the GM. These aren't easy things to continue to push. And if you have your game where it's constantly high tension with no break, that will by the end of the game, it could be a 2 hour, 3 hour, 4 hour session or whatever, but you went into it, you're like, all right, I'm ready, I've slept plenty, I just had a good meal, and by the end of it you're sweating and you're just, oh my god, I'm so freaking tired. Because GMing is not an easy job to do, and make no mistake, it's totally a job. So take the time to kind of sit back with your players and just relax, and
I mean,
maybe
you
inject a couple
let's bring the
lines.
scope out a little bit, not just from the in-play stuff of like let's incorporate Yada game into this as well. You're sitting
Yeah.
around the table, you're having an elaborate dinner scene. Oh shit, somebody actually has pizza that they brought and drinks and whatever. Like it's a great time for you to like do like the weird gestures where you're like pointing a pizza triangle at somebody and just being and like acting as your character like with your mouth half full like you'd see in an anime or something like that. It's just like
Exactly.
you're fucking wrong and here's why, and then you like wave the pizza at him. But in play you're like waving some kind of like meat skewer or whatever. But like the effect's still the same. You get to role play with the pantomime with the food and all that, and you
Yep.
actually just have an excuse to eat in and out of play.
Yep. Um, and with us as a community, uh, there's these opportunities kind of break the monotony of being a GM and even being a player. Because we go, fuck, what was it, Nick? How many hours would we play Shadowrun for? Like
Oh,
seven, eight
back when I actually
sometimes.
had time, yeah, we would start at like 7 o'clock at night, and we could be done anywhere from like midnight to fucking I don't know 3 in the
2 in the morning.
morning. Like it could be anything. You know what? This is also a great way like to continue the game without having to pause for somebody to get up because you can just have
Yeah,
them actually get up and play.
getting
Like
up.
so, like player goes like, man, I need to take a shit. And
And they
he
get
just
up and they
stands
go
up,
take a shit.
and that's the barbarian saying that out loud in the middle of this tavern,
Yeah.
standing up and walking
So
away.
So you can take a 10, 15-minute actual break, but not break the line of the game,
Yeah, you don't
and
have to have a
not
hard break for this.
yeah. So those are really good moments to do stuff like that. Now, I will say this: if you have long game sessions, totally take a break.
Yeah, for real.
Totally fucking take a break, because you will kill yourself as a GM, and your players will be sitting there with crossed legs, like, I gotta pee so bad, but
I mean, or you'll just.
can't get up.
What I found is, you might just burn yourself out. Like your best
That'll
content
happen
will
too.
be behind you because you've been going for so long. You're kind of like just pulling the last bits of your energy trying to like get the plot out, and then that's no good for anybody.
Yeah, like I remember when Legends of Latier was running twice a week,
To be
every week.
to be fair, that was twice a week because we could only play for like 3 hours a pop.
Yeah, but it was it had burnt even us players out there
Oh
after a
yeah.
little while.
Yeah, that was
It
when
was
that's
it
when
was
I
pretty
got the
intense.
inspiration for the GM burnout episode because I was like, "Oh God, what am I doing?"
Why am I doing this to myself? Um, and so yeah, I remember at one point in time where I was running, I was playing in two of Nick's games every week, and then I was running two games of my own every week, and then also playing in another game every week, and I burned out really quick, even as a player. So it's not exclusive to GMs. Take some time in your games to just relax, let your hair down, and not worry about what's coming next, and just kind of feel the moment
That's
and
right, because
absorb it.
that moment might give you some great insight. Because
Oh yeah.
here's a little GM secret for everybody, something that you definitely don't want to abuse, but something that is very useful, especially during one of these scenes. As you're listening to your characters roleplay and theorize about the upcoming events of the plot or what their plans are to do, maybe one of the players says something that is a way better idea than what you had written down. And you're like,
Yeah.
wait a minute, that's a lot
That's
cooler.
that's so more awesome.
And so behind your GM screen, you're like jotting down like notes about what they're saying. You're like,
Uh-huh.
that's some good plot right there.
So
And
keep going.
and I actually think I might have shared this secret before to at least a couple people, but like you don't let it override your whatever you already had planned, but you let it expand on something that maybe you didn't think about. Maybe they
Mhm.
come at it from an angle that you're like, that sounds much more fun than the straightforward slog of fights that I had, which like they were you planned them out to be fun, yeah, sure, like, and it would have been a great time, like to fight through like several encounters in a row. But if they try to do something completely different and they're just theorizing about it, then you don't have to put that in necessarily, but you'd write down the notes so that way you could be like, if they happen to try this, or if maybe you can incorporate some of these ideas back into your initial plot, and then your
Mhm.
players have figured something out, like in play, kind of for realsies, whatever. Um, but you've made a more interesting story for both yourself and the rest of the table.
Yep. One of the greatest things that a player can experience is the wait, I got it. This is what the bad guy's doing, and he's doing it like this. We figured it out. We understand it now, and it's totally wrong. And you're sitting there as a GM, you're like, that's totally wrong, but that's so much cooler than what I thought. And then it comes to fruition, and the player's like, "See, I told ya." That moment is one of the things that your players will eat up, and it's one of the things that they want.
And that's
So
also why you don't want to
yeah,
abuse this power. Because if you do, then that cheapens what they actually discover. So
precisely.
if you're doing this all the time, for instance, then the players are always figuring things out the correct way, and then it loses its luster, it loses the impact, and
Yeah,
it's not genuine at that point, and that's what you want to avoid. So that's why
yeah, because
you take the ideas and put them in rather than wipe whatever you had and then just slap that down.
yeah, like it can be an aspect of the plan that the bad guy had, but he's also got some other, excuse me, he's also got some other stuff. But hey, you figured this part out. Good on you. And you think in the back of your mind, like, phew, I'd have never thought of that shit in a million fucking years. So
Because
those
like
are.
that is a satisfying moment. I've had this
Oh
moment
yeah.
when I accidentally uncovered, or when I accidentally theorized the entire plot for like a huge section of Deadlands, where I was because our GM told us long after the fact. I'd figured it out, and then I went about trying to solve it that way, and uh, then at the end of that, he was like, "You figured that out in like the first thing you said," and I'm like, "Really?" And he's like, "Yeah,
Yeah.
that was bullshit," is what he
It
told
was
me.
totally bullshit. It's totally awesome when your players do stuff like that. Let them have that moment of awe
I
and feeling
mean,
great about
Mara
themselves.
figured that out with the Lotmus situation when she. Well, it was more of an out of play theorization, but she reflected it with in game terms, where he was basically like Tony Stark, where he wants to make things, he wants to do his own thing, and he wants to create amazing shit. And that wasn't something that I was going to share with anybody until like you either figured it out or talked to him. And since she figured that that's probably what this guy's about based on the other information that you had discovered thus far, it turned out that that was a cool reveal. And it wasn't
Yeah.
something I threw in after she had come up with it either. It was something that was like already there, and
Yep.
then it was like, well, damn. I'm glad that because as a GM, you also get to feel the satisfaction because you're sitting there like, hey, I did put enough information out there without just like shoehorning it in that
Yep.
they figured it out, and that's awesome.
It also happens with things you don't expect it to happen with. So be on your toes a little bit. When I started up my campaign, I had all of my notes for the NPCs that I had created that would be recurring NPCs. And one of them happens to be a silver dragon because I love silver dragons. They're my favorite dragon in all of D&D. And I was like, yeah, this person's going to be a silver dragon, but they're secret. They're not telling anybody. And they've managed to keep their ruse going for quite a long time. And they're just doing this thing because they really enjoy doing the work. And they're like, I'm kind of done with the whole. I don't need a horde of anything, but I do collect a lot of the things that I work on. And so yeah, they've used their ability to transform into a human form, and they're just kind of walking around doing their own thing, not bothering anybody. And game one of my players goes into this place, talks to them, and they're just like, yeah, hey, da 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 da. And after the game session is over and we're packing up things for the night, this player turns to the other players and goes, you know what? I think that person is a dragon, a silver dragon to be precise. And I'm like, did you did you
Did,
where's my
did,
notebook?
did
Did
you
you
look at
have
my
my
shit?
notebook? Did you look at my shit, dude? And it was just totally it's just I don't know. I just got a feeling about it. Like I think they're a dragon. That would be awesome if they were a dragon. And I'm like,
Damn it.
well, damn, but also awesome because you figured that shit out with no context. I provided nothing different about this NPC versus any of the other NPCs because I have little quirks about the all of my NPCs that give them a little bit more life and kind of breathe realism into the situation. And it just so happens that I think that person's a silver dragon. Uh, what makes you think that? I don't know. I just have a feeling about it. Well,
Or they might even just
okay.
like bullet point list out the stuff that they've noticed, and you're like, damn, they figured it out just from that.
Yeah, no, right?
It's like,
So
yeah,
I was, I
there
was,
was this book that you described on the bookshelf, and I figured that because it was associated with the draconic language, and because the binding was such and such, that blah blah blah, and there's a silver dragon.
that's actually what they said because she owns a bookstore. Nick,
God damn it!
damn it!
I
Why
I made
you
up that
too?
theory.
You too?
I didn't even know this in context before like 5 seconds ago.
I know. Like, it's like, how the fuck did you know? Because she hoards books and she's a writer. God damn. Do I need to make better NPCs that they can't just be thought of? Like, am I doing something wrong here?
No, maybe you should change up the color of
Oh,
dragon every now and then, though.
uh, yeah,
Yeah, because
maybe.
you do like silver.
I
that
do
is
like
true.
silver dragons. They are my favorite.
No, just in general, because one of your characters was named Silver.
Yeah, they were, weren't they? Huh? That's I don't know.
Yeah,
I like the color silver. It's
I
really
mean
cool.
that's cool. It's fine.
Yeah.
But the important bit is don't steal all the fucking ideas.
No, don't do that.
Come up with your own crap, and thanks for listening. Whether your elaborate roleplay scenes take place at breakfast or not, they are a welcome staple for many gaming groups. It can help flesh out characters, bring players back into the story after disbanding from the last session, and allows the GM to voice NPCs in a low impact environment similar to the players. If you want to support Starblade, like and subscribe or leave a comment. You've all heard this spiel from everyone ever before, so we know you know the drill, and we'll see you next time on Playing God.
Later, man.